Okay, hold on. I got the wrong camera on. 1 second.
And that and an ill-timed bio break on my part, and then it took a while
Okay.
to put you in. So yeah, we're good.
Okay. All right.
Okay. So let me go down here and let's see, make you host. Okay. So
Send a little.
all right. So we don't want to admit Betty yet, but I want to make you make you co-host. There we go. Okay. All right.
Okay, I'm gonna
Now
shut other things off so they don't ring.
yes, yeah, me too. Yeah.
Okay.
We have a pretty good crowd. We'll see. We'll see what happens. And of course, the real action happens when we do the recording and send it out. But I think we'll have a nice little group of people here tonight.
Okay, let me just let's make sure when I share the screen that it doesn't do what it did last time and push my. So how do I guess I just minimize this, right?
Yeah, I would minimize it and then you just bring it up and hit the
yeah, and then go here.
Yep.
And that okay. So I'm going to stop share for now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's going to be good. I had fun putting this together, and I'm already thinking about first 1,000 days, and then at some point we're going to do Vivix, which I wish there was more new news on Vivix. I'll check with the people back at the lab, but I don't think. I'm not aware of anything that they've done recently, but
such an amazing product that should be able to be studied 6 ways to Sunday in terms of what it'll really do. But
so just so you know where I'm headed, I'm going to start by talking about is there one ideal diet for all healthy people, and then what if you are eating for a medical condition. So I'm going to spend most of the time on the first part, but then a little bit of time on the second part, which I think flows in well if you wanted to bring up, oh, is that like meology, right? So meology is when, you have an opportunity to express what your concerns are. And then it's an algorithm that helps, tailor your nutritional priorities, your supplement priorities based on that. So
yeah, I don't think we want to necessarily imply that that's the only thing that meology is good for.
But it's one. It's how it. I think it's how it ties into this. It's personalization, right? So, right.
Great. Yeah, I figured that would be, that would be a nice. You would find a nice way to tie that into personalized nutrition. What the majority of people need, well, I'll tell you what, Bruce, this stuff is so magic. We have a physician who I've known for years, and I saw him, and honest to God, he looked like he was half dead. I mean, it's just like so intensely uncomfortable in his body, just amazing, just inflamed, And Stokes has lost. He's only lost 10 pounds, but looks like a totally different guy. His skin color is, he's now working out 2 times a week with Nadia and very compliant. And he is thrilled, just thrilled. That's
great. That's great.
You feel good to do what I do. That's
very good.
Yeah, that's a pretty wonderful thing. And thank you for making yourself available on my podcast.
Oh yeah, it's my pleasure. I like the teaching side of all this.
Oh, you're really good at it. And so yeah, we'll figure out what we want to do for the new year.
Yeah. So for the prenatal, you said November. Do they actually have a launch date, or you're waiting to hear official word?
Launch next week.
Next week. Okay.
Well, so we'll be in good shape.
I'll start working shortly on the 1,000 days. I thought I had some stuff from before. I certainly talked about it. Yeah. But I'll pull things together.
when you see how cleverly they've put this together, it is just a tour de force. Because the meology assessment, you do an assessment, and so it's before you're pregnant, when you're pregnant, and after you're pregnant. And so it follows you along. Once you get into the system, it'll follow you. You tell the thing when, what stage you're in.
Right.
And then it will cough up different products. Mainly, the multi-V and the little mineral tablet and all that.
Right.
But it's very simple, but the IT behind it is just marvelous. So yeah, it's really going to be a winner.
All right.
Open markets for us.
Very good.
Yeah, it is really very good. Okay, so we got 7:27, so we're going to let people just collect, and then we'll open it to whoever is here. So I am very interested. We'll switch hats and talk about BioCharlies and everything that you're doing.
Yeah, we're trying to get a real experiment going here in the town. We think we have found a good, less expensive alternative to actually buying or manufacturing BioCharlies. So I'll tell you about that later. And we've got several volunteers who are going to try the system in their, wood stove or fireplace or whatever they have. Yeah,
it's really great, and you get a little inoculant. And I'll tell you, one book that you might want to not walk to pick up is called Homecoming. It's about the relocalization of economies from globalization.
Yeah.
National and regional economies, and of course, right down to the, and just before we let everyone in, Leanne Gluck, who is an alumnus of the SLC board, just took a position as the director of a $160 million institute at UC Davis for the study of advanced high technology in agriculture relative to soil health, nutrient density of food, and water quality.
Wow, nice. Nice. Well, Ann and I have a new cause. We found out there's an established community garden in our neighboring town of Rockville that the developers want to turn into a parking lot.
No.
So we're on the warpath. We're mobilizing people. Yeah.
That's time for some serious.
They don't know what they're running into. We're gonna give them some anyway.
Parking lot. Give me a break. Okay, we're at 7:30 now, so we're gonna pop everything up and admit everyone. All right, so admit. Oh, we're having some fun admitting people. Oh my gosh, look at all this. This is just great.
I see some familiar faces.
Yes, I see some marvelous familiar faces. So good. Hey, Paula and Mark and Susan and Betty and Cheryl and Jeff and Adiba and Beverly and Eric. Okay. And David. I think what we'll do, usual protocol, is let a couple minutes go by, and then we will start. And if anyone wants to just say hello to Bruce, and we can chit chat for a little bit before we start. But yeah, this is going to be exciting.
How often do you have these calls?
We have them every second and fourth Thursday, and we will typically move between business calls and product-oriented calls. So we've had some really good ones, and I will go ahead and publish the YouTube channel. There's a particular YouTube channel that we've got that we're archiving them in, and So good. So Mary Lois, okay. Jeff Boltinghouse said he's joining from hospital room. So I guess that's with your pop, Jeff. So
Good morning or
it
good
is.
afternoon,
Yep.
Bruce.
okay, great.
Good to see you, Bruce.
Yeah,
Nice to be here. Greetings from Maryland.
Yeah.
yeah. He's Bruce is lighting things up in Maryland just the way he did in Pleasanton.
I hope your transition to mid-Atlantic gardening is taking hold.
Yeah, we've actually started a new community garden here, and
Great.
so we're still in learning mode. And we planted a few fruit trees in our own garden. We're planning a vegetable patch for next year. So it's coming along. Got the compost piles going.
Yeah, the sooner the better on those trees for sure.
Yeah, the trees were the first priority because
Yep.
yeah. And some berry bushes, vines. And we're figuring out there's a lot of wildlife here. We live in a forest. So we've got deer, rabbits, squirrels, chipmunks, you name it. Foxes to help keep some of the others at bay. And I think Anne's finally going to get a dog. So we'll send the dog on patrol.
Well, yes, that will keep some of the critters at bay. Now, let me go here and make sure that I haven't missed admitting anyone. All right, well, I have 7:33, so let's get rolling. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, let's see here. Let me go down here and maybe Paula, you can help me. I need to mute everyone. And then so that everyone is quiet. So when Bruce is talking, then Bruce's face is shown. I think everyone is muted. But
Good. Okay.
let me make sure that Paula, you can unmute and tell me where's the global mute so that I can everyone can be muted automatically when they come in.
Paula's muted, so.
Paula, you're muted.
You got me on the spot here, but you should be able to do it from that listing of all people. You know, you go on the listing.
Okay, all right, let's see here. Okay, we've got a couple more people to admit and a couple more to admit. Okay. Okay, mute all, thank you. I knew I'd seen that. Okay, here we go. So we mute everyone except me and Bruce. So, whoop.
I'll unmute myself. There we go.
Good. All right.
All right. Shall we get going?
I think we should get going.
Okay.
So
let me.
Why don't I give you? Well, you deserve a little bit of an introduction. I mean, we're still admitting people here.
I'm gonna. Yeah. You keep admitting. I'm just gonna get the screen set up.
Good. All right.
All right.
So great. Well, actually, why don't you unshare for just a moment, and we'll make ourselves big, and then you can share.
Okay. All right.
That little
Oops, wait a
awkward
minute.
moment of just for the video.
Okay. All right. There we go.
Well, good evening, everyone. This is Senior Master Coordinator Bob Ferguson, and it's my pleasure to have yet again our marvelous friend, Dr. Bruce Daggy, on in our Business of Health series. And Bruce has held many illustrious positions as a scientist, as a biochemist, and a marvelous scientist. And he was the head of our science department in Shackley and chief scientific officer. And we're just so delighted to have him with us and still even post his Shackley career. So Bruce, very delighted to have you with me tonight.
All right. Thank you, Bob, and thank you all for joining. I'm going to get my slides back up. Let's see. I can do this. Wait a minute, right here. Okay. Is that everyone can see that all right?
You can see it.
Okay, very good. So a topic that at least I think will be very interesting tonight is there one best diet for everyone? And as Bob said, I think a lot of you know who I am, but I've had a long career focused on nutrition and lifestyle and disease prevention and also nutritional management of health when issues arise. And so this is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. Let me see if it will let me. Oh dear. There we go. I like to remind people that although I have affiliations in the past and affiliations in the present, what I'm going to talk about tonight are just my opinions. I'm not representing any company. I'm not representing Florida State. Just giving you my own personal perspectives. I'm a Ph.D. nutritional biochemist. I do not practice medicine. I do not offer personal nutrition counseling. But I hope I can share with you some ideas that'll help you have further knowledge and develop a good working relationship with your healthcare professionals. So that's my approach. Now we're going to talk about nutrition, and of course we have so many good choices out there. I don't know why anybody would have any difficulty figuring out the right things to eat. There's lots of advertising, to tell us about the excellent foods. And there are many outlets, and you really should be able to figure it out yourself. That's a little bit of a pun. Actually, we live in a candy store, and it's really difficult to make consistently good food decisions. We're talking about what is a good diet, so I thought I would actually go to an online dictionary and look up what a diet is. And there are many definitions, and a diet, of course, can also be a verb as well as a noun. But here are a couple of the noun definitions of a diet. Oh, there's somebody in the waiting room. I'm going to let them in. Oh, you did it already? Okay.
I will monitor that.
Okay. All right. You do that. Let me close this back. So a couple of the noun definitions. One is that it's just the kinds of food that a person, animal, or community habitually eat. So not necessarily good, but just whatever is typical. And then a second common definition is a special course of food to which one restricts oneself either to lose weight or for medical reasons. So I'm going to talk about both of those tonight, both of those definitions with respect to this question, but I'm going to spend most of the time on the first one. What would be a healthy version of the kinds of food that a person habitually eats, and is there one answer for all healthy people? I don't know why it's having trouble deciding to advance. There we go. Okay, so kind of the first question that comes to mind when I'm thinking about the question is, well, what is the desired metric? If we're going to call it the best diet, what is going to be the basis for it being the best diet? And I think this picture illustrates what I think the answer to that is. We would like a diet that would enable us to live a full and active life, to be able to live to a ripe old age with our abilities, both physical and mental, our abilities to enjoy life. So it's basically a long health span, a long active life, not a long period in decline, but a long period in health. So that's what I'm taking as the endpoint of interest. So when you think about, well, is there one best diet? If you've spent any time on this planet, you know that there's a gazillion diets out there. And what the average American eats, we call the standard American diet, or SAD. So that's our starting point. But then there's just almost countless number of alternatives: Mediterranean, high carb, low carb, various kinds of vegetarianism, and all the way to a high meat eating diet. People talk about whole foods diets, keto diets, raw diets. And then there are the people that say, well, no, there's not one best diet for everybody, because you got to look at your blood type or some other metric of you personally to get there. And then we're in a largely Shackley audience here. Does that one diet include or not include supplements? So these are some of the things to think about. I think another thing to realize is when we talk about all healthy people have quite a variation as well. So this includes, for example, healthy endurance athletes. So an athlete who's training for distance cycling versus an athlete that is doing power events versus a woman who is pregnant or lactating, and versus people in different parts of the age range. So you have men, women, active people, not as active people. I think anybody who's trying to be healthy ought to be active to some degree. There's also questions about whether your heritage makes a difference, and clearly to some degree it does. If you look at me, you might guess that my ancestors were Northern European. I have this pale skin, I have these pale eyes. My ancestors on both sides of my family were Northern European for many generations. My ancestors drank cow's milk quite clearly. I have the gene that makes the lactase that helps me break down lactose. I am not at all lactose intolerant, but there are people in other parts of the world whose ancestors had very different diets that can't break down lactose. So that's going to affect what is a healthy diet for them. Being Northern European, having this pale skin, I'm better at making vitamin D with my skin than somebody with darker skin. But having these pale eyes, I am more subject to photo damage to affect my vision than somebody with beautiful brown eyes. So, there are some differences that are potentially driven by our heritage, as well as our gender, our age, our level of physical activity, and whether or not we're pregnant, just as a few examples. So it's a complicated question. Then we have what are the tools that we can use to answer the question of whether there's one healthy diet for everyone? And we have actually quite a variety of tools to understand the relationship between nutrition and health. And some of the more powerful tools are randomized controlled trials or epidemiology studies. I'm going to go into those both a little bit more. And then there are weaker but still potentially useful studies like non-randomized trials, studies of mechanism of action. How does a food or a nutrient affect health? What is the mechanism by which it does it? Non-clinical studies, test tube studies or animal studies, and even case reports of individual people and how they have responded. When we think about randomized control trials, this is what's used in most drug studies. It's considered the gold standard of a clinical trial. Typically, they'll have an active and a placebo treatment if it's a drug study. There's sometimes a dose response or a crossover. So the subjects will start on treatment A, maybe have a washout period, go to treatment B. Others will do it in the opposite order. Ideally, the studies are what are called double blind. So neither the subject nor the investigators know what treatment they're on. And typically, they are powered to look at one key outcome, like having a heart attack. And that outcome, if there is a difference between the two treatments, it can be examined statistically with a low probability that any observed difference was due to chance. However, when you try to apply a randomized controlled trial model to answer the question of the best diet, you're going to have some problems. First of all, blinding will be difficult to impossible. You can't put one group of people on a vegan diet and the other group of people on the standard American diet and not have them know, which one they've been randomized to. You might be able to blind it if you're testing more subtle differences, like the percent fat in the diet or the saturation of the fat in the diet or something like that. So maybe you could, if you're providing the food and you're really hiding the differences to the best of your ability, but it's going to be a lot harder than, you know, two identical looking pills than one's the placebo and one's the active. It's going to be difficult to impossible to do a randomized controlled trial of diet that is of long duration. Maybe you can go for a year, but if you're really comparing, let's say, vegan to lacto-ovo-vegetarian to typical American diet or something like that, you're going to try to get a group of people who are on the standard American diet all to comply with a vegan diet for a year, 2 years. How well do you think that's going to work? Some of them will do it and do it happily. Others are going to just drop out, or they're just not going to comply very well. They're going to be free living, as we say, subjects. You're not going to be able to lock people up for a long time and feed them. So to collect the data on what they've done, you're going to have to ask them questions, either over the phone or in person. And you're going to get data that are fuzzy, because you're not going to be able to get exactly what they ate. You're going to be asking them questions like, what did you eat yesterday? Or how often do you eat blueberries? And I think you can easily picture how those answers are going to be approximations. They're not going to be exact. So you're going to have noise in your data. You're going to have to control for what we call confounders. You'll try to divide the groups into two identical subgroups, but they're not going to be perfectly matched by age, by income, by intensity of exercise, by occupation, by whether or not they smoke, by whether or not and how much they drink alcohol, etc. So you're going to have to control for any of those confounders statistically to the best of your ability. And that's going to make it more difficult. You're going to lose subjects to follow-up, especially if you do a long trial, and you will experience willful misreporting. Maybe the subjects will be embarrassed about what they ate, and they're not going to tell you the absolute truth. Believe me, that happens a lot. The other approach I mentioned is epidemiology. These are real-world experiments, and the father of epidemiology is a Brit named John Snow. Not the one who was in Game of Thrones, different one. So he became famous for solving the question of what caused cholera, or at least maybe not a full causation, but cholera was a significant health problem in Britain in the 1800s. And in 1831-32, there was an outbreak of cholera that killed about 50,000 people in Britain. And Snow collected observations and became a proponent of what's called germ theory, that there was some kind of microbe that was causing cholera. And what he did was collect data on new cases of cholera, where they lived. And at the time, most houses in London didn't have central plumbing. People went to a well in their community to get their drinking water. So he looked at where they lived and where they got their water. And he discovered that use of certain wells was leading to cholera. So there was something in the water that was causing cholera. And that was a very important learning. So that was a key observation, a key study that really led to this field of epidemiology. There are two big categories of designs of epidemiology studies: retrospective and prospective. So retrospective, you're taking a group of people who have had, let's say, different health outcomes, and you are going back, you are looking back at their past history and trying to find differences that are associated with the different outcomes. Prospective studies, you take a group of people and you look forward, you follow them going forward, and you're measuring what they eat and whether or not they have a heart attack or whatever endpoint you're looking for. And you follow them long enough that you hope to see differences between groups, and the differences will be associated with some of the measurements you've made of their different habits. So that's an important thing about epidemiology. It can show an association, but it can't absolutely prove causation. You can show that a behavior is associated with an outcome, but you don't know if there was some other thing that was causing it that you just failed to notice and measure. So epidemiology in nutrition has a very long history. An example, even before John Snow, was the observation that vegetable and fruit consumption could prevent scurvy. So we didn't know what vitamin C was until about 1910, but the observation that scurvy could be caused by lack of fruit and vegetable consumption and reversed by fruit and vegetable consumption was an example of epidemiology. In the early 20th century, same thing happened with pellagra, which was a B vitamin deficiency that was very common in the South. Nobody knew what caused it. This was an early success of the US Public Health Service. Likewise, iron deficiency anemia came to be understood through epidemiology. Observations in the 1960s that the Greenland Eskimos had very little heart disease led to a whole slew of research, including some of my own, on the role of eating fish and omega-3 fatty acids. Now we're trying to apply epidemiology to very slow developing multifactorial metabolic diseases. And that's really hard to do for all the reasons I was talking about just a little while ago. But Shackley's landmark studies, which many of you would know, are an example of trying to apply epidemiology to get a better understanding of how nutrition can impact health. So again, just like with a randomized controlled trial, you have many challenges with doing a nutrition epidemiology study, including some of the very same challenges you'd have with an RCT. What did you eat yesterday? How often do you eat blueberries? You still got to control for confounders. You're still going to lose subjects to follow up. If you were studying something like a vegan diet versus the standard American diet, you have to realize not everybody eating a vegan diet is eating the same thing. And, they can be getting more or less of different nutrients. And nutrients interact. They're using multiple different products. So you're lumping people together when they're really, it's not, again, not like a drug study. They're not all taking exactly the same thing. You could do the study and find out at the end that you had too little diet variation. So a famous study where this happened was a study done in US doctors, long-term prospective study. And end of the day, these doctors were just eating too much alike. They didn't have a big spread in terms of the intake of things that they were hoping would drive observations of key differences. Another challenge if you're doing a long-term study is that people's diets change over time, and you can measure multiple times and you might pick that up. Ask yourself, is your diet the same as it was 20 years ago? I know in my case, it's not. So if they're trying to look at, something that's developing over a lifetime, how much does it matter if I was eating very differently 20 years ago and another subject was not? And finally, again, you will have willful misreporting, and that will also make coming to conclusions harder. So these are just, some of the challenges. I want you to realize that when we don't have easy, clear, definitive answers, when you get all this conflicting information, if you look into the nutrition literature yourself and look at what people are saying, it's not that they're all crazy. It's not that they're necessarily dishonest or anything. These are hard questions. These are hard questions to study. And even if really bright people are doing the best they can, they're going to come to some different conclusions. It's simply unavoidable. Having said all that, when you look at the totality of the data, whether it's coming from randomized trials or epidemiology or any of the other methods that I really didn't have time to go through, the preponderance of evidence would say that a diet that is largely plant-based is going to be the way to go for healthy people to stay healthy. A largely plant-based diet. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that means, but that is the one that is going to be the way to go. And there are studies that show a number of different reasons or proofs of that argument. So, for example, such a diet is going to lower inflammation, and inflammation, drives a lot of health problems over time. It's been shown to lower the risk of cardiovascular disease, multiple endpoints for there, lower the risk of multiple cancers, including common cancers like colorectal cancer, lower the risk of dementia, lower the risk of diabetes. It lowers DNA damage. And I could go on. So there are just a number of benefits. If you're mainly filling your plates with plant-based nutrition, that's going to be giving you the best outcome. It doesn't have to be 100%, but largely plant-based. What do I mean by plant-based? Because what comes to mind first for a lot of people is fruits and vegetables, and that's certainly true. But there's more. So seeds and fruit. I mean, fruit is the container, if you will, for seeds. So if you cut into an apple, you find the core, the seeds are in there. So a tomato really is a fruit. We call it a vegetable, but a tomato is a fruit because you cut it open, the seeds are in there. So you can be eating the seeds, you can be eating the whole fruit, beans, very important, nuts, whole grains. And then there are other plant parts of certain foods that we eat. The leaf of spinach or kale, the flowers. I don't know if you ever thought about this. Broccoli is a flower. It just hasn't opened yet. If you ever grow broccoli and you just leave it long enough, you'll have flowers. But you can eat. There are a lot of edible flowers. I like to eat nasturtium flowers. They're beautiful and all that color. I know they got good carotenoids in them, and I like the taste. You can eat root crops like carrots, beets, parsnips, turnips. You can eat tubers, which are really a kind of modified stem. So there are a number of tubers that we eat: potatoes, sweet potatoes, yams, sunchokes, and others. You can eat the stems of some plants like rhubarb, celery. And then I put a bracket around here on fungi. Fungi is not in the plant kingdom. Fungi is not a plant, not an animal. It's got its own little kingdom. So like mushroom is an example, but it is very plant-like in terms of its nutrition. So fungi, for example, is a source of dietary fiber. It contains protein, contains some minerals, some vitamins. It will have little or no fat. It's very lean, low sugar. So it's very vegetable-like in that sense. Now, you might have noticed that I put many of these things in green, and I wonder if it's occurred to anybody why some of these are green and others are not highlighted that way. So if you haven't figured it out, the answer is these are nutrient-dense parts of the plant that are directly involved in plant reproduction. So obviously seeds, you plant seeds, you grow a new plant, beans, nuts, whole grains. So I buy wheat berries that I mill myself when I'm making my bread. So there you've got it. Flowers are obviously involved in reproduction. Tubers, you can take the eyes, cut potatoes into separate eyes and plant them, and you'll get a new potato. And you can, I mean, there are things that we eat that are things that I've grown from a leaf or from a stem or from a root. But in nature, there are these forms that nature has created for propagation of plants. And if you think about it, the package that is required for successful propagation is going to be nutrient dense, right? There's this tiny little seed, for example, that has everything to make a new broccoli or a new carrot. I mean, carrot seed's very small, right? But it's got protein in there. It's got minerals. It's got vitamins. It's got essential oils. Many seeds have a seed coat that contains soluble fiber. Why? Because that soluble fiber will hold water around the seed and help the germination process. So when you're eating these parts of the plant that are involved in reproduction, you're getting a lot of nutrition relative to the calories. You're getting minerals and vitamins and fiber and more, not just energy. So I think that's one of the reasons why a largely plant-based diet is good for us, because we need all these other things so that the systems in our body have the raw materials that they need in order to do the maintenance and repair of our systems. And if they're lacking some of those, essential nutrients, then they have to triage how much of the repair is possible. I want to be clear also, I'm not talking about the big, what I call the big food version of plant-based, because there's a lot of advertising out there, right? Our plant-based nutrition. Well, you could start with a seed and you end up with just the oil. You've thrown away the minerals, you've thrown away the fiber and everything else, but you still got the oil. You can start with fruit and you can end up with a juice drink with lots of extra sugar added into it. You could start with a whole grain and end up with white rice, white bread, high fructose corn syrup, or corn oil. Yes, corn, we call it a vegetable, it's a grain. Okay, you dry corn, it's a grain. You could start with a root crop like a sugar beet and end up with table sugar. You could start with a nice tuber like a potato and end up with French fries and potato chips. And all those things could be completely consistent with a vegan diet or any other kind of vegetarian diet. And you'd say, I'm getting plant-based nutrition, but are you really? No, not in terms of what the plant had in mind. You could take a lot of nice things and you could fry them up heavily and sprinkle them with salt. It's not the same. So it does matter how they're prepared. Okay, so it's because of this we get a lot of guidance from the government, from academics, and even sometimes from the industry that our diet is unhealthy. And you see in this chart, most Americans are not getting the targets for vegetables, fruit. This says total grains, so I guess that's something a little different from whole grains. Whoever put this together, really likes the idea of dairy and oils, and we could quibble over some of the targets there. On the other hand, we're getting way more than we need of added sugars, saturated fats, and sodium. So you'll see this quite consistently. This is the pattern for the standard American diet where we are now. And it applies to the micronutrients as well. This is from a 2011 report, but I'm sure the numbers haven't changed very much since then. The vast majority of Americans are based on the daily values, which aren't even necessarily, optimal nutrition, but at least they're a reasonable target. Almost all Americans are not getting enough potassium in their diet. They're not getting enough fiber. Many of us not getting enough vitamin D, calcium, magnesium, vitamin A, vitamin C, some of the B vitamins, minerals, and this is far from a complete list. So our diet is not, for most of us, is not giving us all of the nutrition that is consistent with optimal health or anything close to it. So a good way to dive further into exactly what do we mean by a plant-based diet, because again, it doesn't mean you can't eat fish or poultry or meat or dairy or eggs. You can certainly have foods from those categories. And in fact, I would argue it is easier to get all the nutrition that you need if you are willing to eat some animal products. You can eat a very good vegan diet. It is possible to do. And you just have to be aware that it's more work and probably requires some supplementation for things like vitamin B12. You may have trouble getting all of the protein you need unless you're using protein powder like soy protein. And you may need to go find an algal source of omega-3 because if you're not willing to eat fish. But you can get there with a vegan diet. And if you eat a good vegan diet, it is extremely healthy. But you could eat a vegan diet that's extremely unhealthy too. And I think it's a little easier to get all the nutrition you need if you are what I would call myself a flexitarian, who sometimes will eat chicken or fish or eggs or other animal-derived products. But I like the blue zones people. I like the way that they explain it. The founder of this group, or the head of this group, Dan Buettner, is not a scientist. He's a journalist, but I think he does an excellent job of pulling a team together that has looked at healthy populations around the world, populations that have healthy, long lives, and what they are doing. And some of them are really vegetarian or vegan. Some of them are not, or more traditional, say, Mediterranean diet. And they look at more than just the diet. They look at other aspects of life, like meditation and connection with others and finding a purpose. But if you can see in the lower part of this graph that I took from one of their books, that a plant slant is central, is one of the central principles. 80% rule refers to leaving the table when you're still a little hungry. You don't eat till you're bursting. You get like 80% full, and then you step back. Let your body have time to realize that it really had enough. And then wine at 5. If you do drink alcohol, the Blue Zone teachings would say that's fine. It's actually good for you in moderation. No overdosing on it. No binging on weekends. But if you have a glass of wine with dinner, that is associated with good outcomes. So if you look for the Blue Zone books or go to the website, they will show you examples of how people have practiced largely plant-based diets around the world in these different areas that they have studied, and there are recipes and information on the study. So I think it's a very good, accessible way to get into eating a largely plant-based diet. Okay, so that's if you're healthy. So in my view, if you're healthy, then that kind of common plant-based approach, which still has some variations to it that you can, maybe use to find what works for you a little more easily. It's not so ironclad. You have some flexibility in there, but that's a good general approach. But what if we're at that second definition of diet, where you're eating something for a medical reason? Well, I think it stands to reason then that, okay, now we're into a place where what one person does is not going to be what another person does, because we're dealing with different medical conditions. So, what does it mean in that case? And I want to make it perfectly clear, in the United States right now, it is almost becoming unusual not to be treating a medical condition. This is from a book published in 2015. I think I'm an author in one of the other chapters in this book. I didn't write this particular chapter, but this chapter had to do with polypharmacy. That's when people are taking more than one prescription drug on a regular basis. And at the time of this report, and I'm sure it's about the same now, looking at all U.S. adults, more than 82% were on one or more medications on a regular basis, and 29% were on 5 or more medications on a regular basis. And when you looked at the older age range above age 57, 91% on 1 or more, 50% on 5 or more. I just find that staggering, that people are on so many prescription drugs on a regular basis. So when we talk about, what are there different things that people who are not healthy should be doing? According to this, that's a very sizable fraction of the population that might be considering or should be considering whether there's something they can do with a nutrition and lifestyle effort to help manage their health. And I think that's important because with medications, they're not a panacea. There is, I mean, I'm not telling you not to take drugs. And certainly if your doctor has told you to take drugs, I'm not trying to argue with your doctor. If you need drugs, take drugs. But there is no medication that produces a successful result in 100% of the people who take it. That just doesn't happen. Have you ever known anyone who went on chemotherapy who died from the cancer? Have you ever known anyone who took a drug to help them stop smoking who failed to stop smoking? There's no drug I can think of. There is no drug that exists that works 100% of the time. And in fact, there are a lot of drugs that are approved by regulatory agencies because they are useful and they help some people, but they help less than half the people who take them. That's just the reality. You can get a drug approved in some cases that only works 1 time in 20. Okay. And every drug out there has potential risks in addition to potential benefits. And the more drugs you're taking, the more opportunity there is for drug-drug interactions where something adverse happens, or drug-nutrient interactions where something adverse happens. And the consequences can be severe. They can affect quality of life. They can affect cognition and function and nutritional status as examples. So to the extent you can use diet and lifestyle to decrease your need for medication, to enable you to either stop a medication, not go on a medication, get the efficacy you need with a lower dose of the medication, then I think that's all a good thing in terms of a risk-benefit ratio. So why are so many people in this category? I think one charitable explanation, not to just say, well, it's big pharma pushing this on everybody, is that as our knowledge of health has expanded, there has been a proliferation of known diseases. So years and years ago, cardiovascular disease was known, but it was mainly known because somebody would drop dead of a heart attack or drop dead of a stroke or have at least a serious health issue with a heart attack or a stroke that maybe they survive. Well, as we came to understand why do people have heart attacks? Why do they have strokes? We started to identify risk factors like high cholesterol, high triglycerides, high blood pressure. And then it got a little more specific. Well, it's not all cholesterol, it's high LDL cholesterol, because actually high HDL cholesterol, that's the good cholesterol. So you don't want to have you don't have low HDL, you don't want to have high LDL. And then we learned there's something called lipoprotein little a, and that became another risk factor. Well, some of these risk factors got so well established that they became known as diseases on their own. So high cholesterol became hypercholesterolemia. High blood pressure became a disease. And the pharmaceutical industry looked for treatments for all of these things. So every so often on the television commercials, you will hear about a disease that you've never heard before. This is how it happens. Adult onset diabetes is the old name for what we now call type 2 diabetes because so many children started getting it. And then as medical science looked at where does diabetes come from, they said, oh, well, before there's diabetes, there's this thing called pre-diabetes where your regulation of blood glucose is going off. And it's not quite to the point that you have defined diabetes yet, but you're really not quite right. Well, now, I don't know if it's officially classified as a disease, but pre-diabetes is being treated. It is being treated not uncommonly by doctors with pharmaceuticals. Obesity was not defined as a disease until the WHO said so in 1948. And at the time, there was so little obesity in the world, they said, this is really just a problem in the United States and the United Kingdom. Wasn't really a problem anywhere else. Now it's clearly a global problem. And I agree with them that it is a disease. It would be crazy not to think of it as a disease. And obesity is driving higher risk of about 80 other medical conditions. So if we could really come up with a good way to prevent or reverse obesity, that could prevent the need for a lot of other drugs that are treating, conditions that develop as a result of that obesity. And finally, we have gotten to the point where we have drugs to treat the side effects of the other drugs we're taking. So your doctor will put you on a drug for some problem, and it gives you nausea, or it gives you constipation, or depletes your platelets, or causes some other problem like that. Now you're on a second drug to overcome the side effects of the first drug. So this is why so many of us have ended up in a state of polypharmacy. And it brings me back to a slide I've used before, which I think Aldous Huxley summarized it up very well. Medical science has made such tremendous progress that there's hardly a healthy human left. That's really where we are. We have so many people with diagnosed heart disease, diabetes, pre-diabetes, fatty liver, osteoarthritis, you name it. There's just, it is hard. It's getting hard to find a healthy human in the United States. And this brings me to something that I said a few years ago, and back to the challenges here. Optimal nutrition supports optimal health. Knowing what qualifies as optimal nutrition is not easy, but the principle is correct, and I don't think anybody with common sense could deny it. If we could figure out the right things to do in terms of diet and lifestyle, it would be just a huge benefit to human health. Actually absolutely change the way that we practice medicine if we could really figure this all out. So, here's a slide I've used many times. This is my little, summary of how I approach it. And now under the second bullet, eat a healthy diet, I've added a little asterisk down at the bottom, says largely plant-based. I want to go back up now in terms of these, people who are eating to try to manage a known medical problem. Starts with knowing your risks, right? If you can know your risks, then you can be adjusting your diet to try to address those risks. So I'm going to give the example out of my own life, my own personal case as an example of how I think about this. How do I think about knowing my risks? So one of my risks is cardiovascular. How do I know this? Well, first of all, I live in a culture where cardiovascular disease is a leading cause of morbidity and mortality. So it'd be kind of crazy not to think about whether that is a problem for me. I am also in a risk category demographically. I am an older male. And if you're going to have a cardiovascular event and you're an older male, it's not going to surprise anybody. It's kind of expected in our culture. So, okay, demographically, check that box. Do I have a family history of heart disease? Absolutely. My father and his father both died of cardiovascular disease. And I have a personal history of elevated cholesterol. I go see my doctor, I get my blood draws, and yes, my LDL cholesterol tends to run high, has for my entire adult life, is tended to run high. It's something that I have to manage to keep in an acceptable range. So what are my actions based on knowing that is one of my risks? Well, one thing that I do, I have a blood pressure monitor machine at home so I can monitor my blood pressure, make sure that I'm keeping my blood pressure in the desirable range. I go to my doctor and he monitors my blood lipids, my blood glucose, and other risk factors that relate to cardiovascular health. I do not smoke. I work to manage my weight. I work to manage my stress. I'm retired now. That's helped a little bit. And then some of the blue zones aspects, finding your purpose, finding your community, feeling connected. These are good things in terms of maintaining a healthy outlook and a positive attitude, and again relates to stress. So those are some of my actions. In the case of diet, I do practice what I preach. I eat a largely plant-based diet. Ann and I grow what we can, and we go to the farmer's market and buy what we can, and so forth. So fruit, vegetable, beans, nuts, seeds. We do use vegetable oils, mostly olive oil. I work to limit saturated fat and cholesterol. Don't eat a lot of red meat. Very much focus on limiting added sugar and sodium intake. I use a low sodium salt, so it's partly replaced with a potassium salt. So I'm getting more of the potassium, knowing that low potassium intake is a problem in our culture. This is hard. We very rarely eat out because it's difficult. I have sympathy with people in the restaurant business, trying to make their living that way. But they are competing on price. They're competing on, having a big plate. They use a lot of fat and sugar and salt because those are not only inexpensive ingredients often, but they are things that are taste buds like. So it's hard if you eat out a lot. And I think the Blue Zones books will also support this. It is just really hard to eat a very healthy diet if you're eating out all the time. When we do eat out, a lot of times my wife and I will share an entree, look for the salads, look for the non-fried foods, try to find things that are interesting and things we wouldn't make at home. But even if you eat, half of the entree in a lot of restaurants, you are way over the top in terms of what you would really want to get nutritionally and with things like saturated fat and added sugar. For that cholesterol problem that I mentioned, there's a researcher I used to know named David Jenkins in Toronto who came up with what he called the portfolio diet. The idea here was a little bit like instead of taking a handful of drugs, could you combine all the nutrients that have been shown to be good for lowering cholesterol and put them into one program? So there have been work, and I did some of it myself, work on soluble fiber. So we said, okay, let's take soluble fiber, let's take soy protein, let's take plant sterols and walnuts, each of which had been tested individually in clinical trials and shown to improve LDL cholesterol. Well, what if you put them all into one diet? How much would that lower cholesterol? And he got very large, like pharmaceutical levels of reduction, 20, 30% or more, when people combined these four foods. So I built that into my diet. I take fish oil. I worked on fish oil, big believer in fish oil. I take inorganic nitrates, which in the body, kind of a complicated story, but your body can turn inorganic nitrates into NO, which is a messenger in the bloodstream, which will cause your artery walls to relax, so it helps control blood pressure. These are found in many vegetables. So it's vegetable science. And finally, I take a multivitamin, and this is not a complete list, but I also take a multivitamin just to cover off anything that I might still be short of. So in that list, I'm eating the best diet I can, but I've still got about a half a dozen supplemental materials that I'm using to help me manage that personal risk. So I hope that helps as kind of an example of how you can think about the optimal diet if you are managing a health concern. how am I doing? Well, knock on wood. I am, at this point, I am still not diagnosed with heart disease. I am not on any medications. I am now 14 years older than my father was when he had his first heart attack. On the not so good side, I am still recovering from smoke inhalation from the California wildfires, and that really did set my health back a few years ago. And one of the reasons why we are not living in California anymore. And I pay very, very, very close attention to air quality inside the house and outside the house now, because I am doing the best I can to get my my lungs and my circulatory system back to where they were. So it's always a challenge. There's always something. So with that, I hope I've said a few things that have given you some thoughts and ideas and new understanding. I would encourage you all to go through this exercise of figuring out your risks, eating the best diet you can, which is going to be largely plant-based, getting a regular exercise program, working on optimal weight, supplementing wisely, and finding your community. And with that, I will stop sharing, and maybe we have time for a few questions.
Really marvelous, Bruce. This is just so terrific. I'm looking at the time, and
Okay.
we've been here for an hour. And so I'm thinking that since hey, folks have a lot of questions, but I did see one that maybe, Bruce, you could deal with. And then I had the idea that would it be good to have Bruce come and just do a Q&A?
Yeah.
And what we would do is we would do a controlled Q&A, kind of like sort of the political forums,
Okay.
you figure out the questions ahead of time.
Okay.
Then you ask if we get that. So we'll solicit questions, and so you can just take questions.
Fine.
But one question that I think who had Pam Nichols had hear a lot about inflammation, and that inflammation is a key factor in so many diseases. And we know from our Shackley side that Vivix, and we will do another entire segment on Vivix because it's so dramatic in terms of reducing effects of inflammation and cellular regulation and all that. But just thinking about eating a diet for low inflammation, of course, if I had to answer channeling Bruce Daggy, I would say listen to the last hour.
Yeah.
And you'd probably find a diet that would be excellent at reducing inflammation. But since you're here, I'll let you answer.
Yeah. Well, again, I think it's largely plant-based because that has been shown to be beneficial. The omega-3 is also a part of that. We are going to talk about things like polyphenols. I think what Vivix is one supplemental approach to polyphenols, and so we'll get into some of that from the supplementation side. But yes, I mean it's a little tricky talking about it in terms of frankly the regulation. If you're talking about supplements. FDA, FTC, concerns about what you can and cannot say. So I have to be a little careful as we go into that area. But food can be inflammatory. Your choices of food can be inflammatory, and eating food is not a disease. So I can talk about inflammation with respect to diet. I can also talk about inflammation in respect to overexertion. So, if you do you're too hard swinging your pickaxe in the garden, and you get some pain from that, that's not a disease. Okay, so I can talk about inflammation in certain contexts, and there are some really interesting studies nutritionally, including some of the work that was done with Vivix. That is okay to talk about. One of the published studies with Vivix was looking at the response to an inflammatory meal. And if memory serves, I haven't looked at it in a little while, the inflammatory meal was a McDonald's breakfast. And the Vivix was blunting the inflammatory response to that meal, which is really interesting. And the investigator who did that work was so fascinated by it that he went on to do a number of other studies. And so coming back to that, you can have a glass of red wine. One of the studies, he had subjects have a steak dinner, or a steak dinner with a glass of red wine, or a steak dinner where the steak was marinated first in the red wine. And that was progressively less inflammatory. When the meat had time to actually incubate with the wine, there was the least inflammatory response. And then in the middle, we at least had the glass of red wine with the meat, that was moderate. And then the most inflammatory was just to eat the steak. Fascinating stuff.
That's really
So,
wonderful.
so I can talk about things like that, but I can't legally, talk about inflammation in a disease context, because now you're making disease and drug claims, and that's a no-no. Can't go there.
Good. Well, the conclusion that I come to listening to you many, many times is that if we want to, that one statement, optimal diet is correlated with optimal health. Now, how you define it, how you develop it, and yet it seems from people's common experience that if you simply eat a largely plant-based diet, if you read the Blue Zones book, that was very clear to me. There was a lot of other factors that led to people living to 100 in a healthy way, but a plant-based diet was pretty much, well, it was what every one of those cultures did. They'd have meat once a month or meat a little bit, but it was primarily a good, solid plant-based diet. And so I'm going with that.
And it's working very well for you, I can tell.
Oh yeah, it's fun. It's fun being 72 and not knowing what age you are.
All right. Well, so you'll get the recording of this up sometime soon. And then, yes, we can talk about having a Q&A session sometime in the future. And then I think the next talk we're planning is the first 1,000 days, talking about getting children off to a great start.
Now that's in November, a bit before Thanksgiving. We are going to be talking about the first 1,000 days and our program, our prenatal program, which is just amazing. They did a thorough review of that at the conference, and also a very thorough review to the masters, and it was just absolutely fabulous. So Bruce, thank you very much. You're such an asset. You're such a great friend. And I will edit this up, take off my somewhat clumsy introduction, and take off our chit chat at the end. And we'll have a nice, clean, beautiful recording to share with people. So thank you all for coming. This is great. And we'll see you next time.
All right. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was great.